Watch it. You just dumped coffee all over him." Laughter flickered through the crowded hotel cafe as a young waitress froze with the empty pot still trembling in her hand. The splash of hot coffee ran down the sleeve of the quiet single dad who had been stacking plates beside the industrial sink. Nobody in the room noticed the small tattoo briefly revealed on his wrist. Nobody knew the quiet single dad washing dishes in the hotel cafe carried a combat medic tattoo. Guests only saw a tired worker in a stained apron raising a daughter and keeping his head down. Then a waitress spilled coffee on him and froze when the mark flashed under the kitchen lights. Because that symbol belonged to an elite military trauma unit few civilians had ever heard of. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. What nobody understood yet was that the man they were staring at had spent years keeping people alive in places far more dangerous than a luxury cafe. He didn't flinch. Caleb Rourke simply reached for a towel hanging from the sink rail and calmly wiped the coffee from his arm. The movement was slow, steady practice like someone who had cleaned worse things from his skin. Lena Morales felt her stomach twist. "I'm so sorry, I didn't see you there," she said, grabbing napkins and stepping closer. The dishwasher shrugged. "It's just coffee," he murmured. His voice carried the quiet steadiness of someone who rarely raised it. Still, Lena couldn't stop staring at the tattoo before he pulled his sleeve down. A sharp black emblem crossed with wings and a medical rod. It looked military. Not the kind soldiers bragged about. The kind people earned somewhere far away from cameras. Behind them, the cafe roared with dinner traffic. Plates clattered, grinders buzzed, and rain tapped steadily against the tall harbor windows. None of it seemed to bother the man at the sink. He finished wiping his arm, then returned to stacking plates with quiet efficiency. A small backpack rested near the staff lockers. Beside it, a little girl sat at a corner table doing homework. Colored pencils rolled across the surface every time the floor vibrated with passing carts. That was Ava. Every few minutes she looked up toward the dish station. Her father always noticed. Even now he glanced over his shoulder and gave her a small, reassuring nod. The girl smiled and went back to her math worksheet. Lena followed the exchange. Something about it softened the tight knot in her chest. A man like that didn't look like the kind who chased attention. He looked like someone hiding from it. "You sure you're okay?" she asked quietly. He rinsed another plate. "Yeah." A pause lingered between them. Then, from upstairs, the faint echo of music drifted down the stairwell. The Halberg Gala had started. Lena sighed. "Tonight's going to be chaos," she muttered. The dishwasher slid another rack into the machine. Steam curled into the fluorescent lights. "Most nights are," he replied. Upstairs, billionaires toasted champagne. Downstairs, the man everyone overlooked kept the plates moving. No one there knew that before he learned to scrub pans, those same hands had once stopped soldiers from bleeding out under desert skies. And no one in the cafe realized that within the hour, the quiet kitchen worker would walk straight into a ballroom full of powerful strangers and become the only person who could save a child's life. But for now, he simply reached for another plate. Water rushed over stainless steel. The smell of soap and coffee filled the room. Lena walked back toward the dining floor, though her eyes drifted once more to the sleeve hiding that strange symbol. She had the sudden feeling she had just glimpsed something important. Something the entire building had missed. At the sink he worked in silence, unaware that the small accident with a coffee pot had already started a chain of events no one upstairs could stop. And somewhere above them, beyond the glittering ballroom doors, a boy laughed beside his grandfather, unaware that before the night ended, his life would depend on the quiet man washing dishes 2 floors below. He glanced once more toward Ava as she packed her pencils neatly into the worn backpack. "Homework done?" he called softly. Almost, she answered, swinging her legs under the chair. The man nodded and returned to the sink, unaware the spilled coffee had just exposed the first clue to the life he had tried so hard to leave behind forever. But Lena kept thinking about that tattoo as she stepped back onto the busy cafe floor, sensing the quiet dishwasher was far more than the job anyone believed he held. Tonight, the dishwasher was still sliding the last rack of plates into the steaming machine when Lena pushed through the kitchen doors again. Music from the ballroom upstairs vibrated faintly through the ceiling, the deep pulse of a string quartet mixed with the hum of conversation and glassware. The Halberg Gala was in full swing now. Every floor of the waterfront hotel felt tighter, louder, more demanding. She grabbed a stack of plates from the counter beside him. "You always this calm when people dump coffee on you?" she asked. He didn't look up from the sink. "Depends if they mean it. I didn't," she said quickly. "I know." Water thundered against stainless steel as he rinsed another tray. Steam curled into the fluorescent lights above them. For a moment, Lena simply watched him work. There was something unusual about the way he moved. Not fast, not frantic like the other staff during dinner rush, just efficient. Every motion deliberate, every plate stacked exactly the same way. "You were military, weren't you?" she asked suddenly. The rack in his hands paused for half a second. Then he slid it into the washer. "That long ago?" "So I'm right," he shrugged. "Used to be. What branch?" "Army." "That tattoo, it's medical, right?" He turned slightly toward her now, the faintest hint of caution in his eyes. "Why?" "Because I saw it." He wiped his hands on the towel hanging from the rail. Lots of people have tattoos, not ones that make someone pull their sleeve down that fast. For a moment, he didn't answer. Across the kitchen, a cook shouted for more plates. Someone dropped a tray. A manager barked about the timing of the next course upstairs. The dishwasher simply went back to work. "I fix dishes," he said quietly. "That's not what you used to fix." He didn't reply. From the dining area, the doors swung open again as a waiter hurried through carrying empty champagne flutes. The ballroom's packed, the waiter called toward the kitchen. Halberg brought half the city with him tonight. Lena glanced toward the stairwell that led upstairs. Victor Halberg, the billionaire hotel owner. The man whose name sat above the entrance in gold letters 10 feet tall. "He's here with his grandson, too," the waiter added. "Kid's been running circles around the servers all night." The dishwasher didn't react. But Lena noticed something. When the waiter mentioned the child, his eyes briefly flicked toward the backpack by the lockers. Toward Ava. The little girl was now coloring quietly beside the table lamp. "Your daughter?" Lena asked. "Yeah. She waits here every night?" "Most nights. That allowed?" He shrugged again. "Manager doesn't mind if she stays out of the way." The girl looked up then and gave Lena a polite wave. Lena smiled back. "Hey there, hi." The girl returned to coloring. Something about the scene softened the edge of the loud kitchen. A father working double shifts. A daughter doing homework beside the staff lockers. No drama, no complaints, just survival. Lena leaned against the counter. "You ever miss it?" "Miss what?" "The army." He rinsed another plate. "Not really." "That's a lie." This time he glanced at her. "Why would you say that?" "Because people who don't miss something don't hide reminders of it." The dishwasher opened the machine door and steam rushed out like fog. He slid the rack inside. "Sometimes hiding things keeps life simple." She crossed her arms. Simple doesn't look like 2 jobs and late-night dish duty. He didn't argue. Instead, he turned toward Ava again. "You hungry?" he asked. The girl nodded, little. He grabbed a wrapped sandwich from the fridge and set it on the table for her. She grinned. "Thanks, Dad." Lena watched the exchange. Something inside her shifted. Maybe it was the calm. Maybe it was the quiet patience. Or maybe it was the strange feeling that the man washing dishes had lived through things the rest of the building couldn't imagine. Upstairs laughter rolled through the vents again, glasses clinked, music swelled, and somewhere above them the powerful people of the city celebrated another night of success. Down in the service kitchen, the dishwasher continued rinsing plates, but Lena couldn't stop thinking about that tattoo. Because symbols like that didn't belong on someone hiding behind a sink. They belonged to people trained for chaos, and for the first time since the coffee spill, she had the unsettling feeling the hotel might soon discover exactly what that symbol meant. By the way, if stories like this pull you in, make sure you subscribe with the bell on so you don't miss the moment everything changes later tonight. Because upstairs, the gala was only getting started, and before the night ended, the quiet dishwasher everyone overlooked would be standing in the center of the ballroom while the entire room waited for him to act. The dishwasher finished sliding the rack into the steaming machine just as Lena turned back toward the dining floor. The kitchen doors swung open again. Careful, hot pan coming through. One of the cooks rushed past carrying a skillet that hissed violently with oil. Behind him, another server nearly collided with a tray stacked high with plates. Dinner rush had reached that chaotic stage where everyone moved faster than they should. Lena paused beside the counter. "You ever notice," she said quietly, "that this place looks calm from the outside?" The man rinsed another dish. Most chaos does. Before she could answer, a loud metallic crack snapped through the kitchen. Everyone froze. One of the industrial burners had flared suddenly, sending a burst of flame licking up the side of the cooking station. A young prep cook stumbled backward, knocking a pot sideways. Boiling broth sloshed across the floor. "Whoa." The prep cook slipped. For a second, the entire kitchen seemed to tilt into panic. Someone shouted. Another cook grabbed a towel and waved it uselessly toward the flame. The prep cook's foot skidded dangerously close to the burner. Then the dishwasher moved. He didn't run, he didn't shout, he simply stepped forward. One hand caught the slipping cook's shoulder before he could fall into the stove. The other hand reached past the chaos and twisted the gas valve beneath the burner with a quick, precise motion. The flame died instantly. Silence filled the kitchen. Steam drifted through the air. The prep cook blinked. Thanks." The dishwasher gave a small nod and nudged the pot upright with his boot. "Floor's slick," he said calmly. Someone grabbed a mop. Another cook wiped the counter. Within seconds, the kitchen returned to motion. But Lena was staring. "You didn't even hesitate," she said. He shrugged slightly. "Gas lines are simple. That's not what I meant." He picked up another plate. "Kitchen accidents happen." "Yeah," she said slowly, "but most people scream first." He rinsed the plate. "I've seen worse." The word slipped out before he seemed to realize it. Lena leaned closer. "How much worse?" For a moment the only sound was water hitting stainless steel. Then he said quietly, "Enough." She studied him. The calm way he moved. The way he had stepped straight into danger without thinking. The way his eyes had scanned the burner, the cook, the valve, all in a single second. That wasn't normal kitchen instinct. That was something trained. Something practiced. "You ever work emergency medicine?" she asked. He almost smiled. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you move like someone who's used to emergencies." The dishwasher wiped his hands again. Habit. Across the room, the prep cook shook his head in disbelief. "Man, I thought I was about to faceplant into that stove." "Next time watch the floor," the dishwasher replied. The prep cook nodded quickly. "Yeah." "Right." Then he hurried away. Lena folded her arms. You know what the weird part is? What? You didn't look surprised. By what? That flame. He gave a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. Fire behaves predictably. You say that like a firefighter. He didn't answer. Upstairs, the music swelled again, drifting through the vents like distant thunder. The gala crowd was getting louder. Glasses clinked, people cheered. The celebration upstairs felt like another world. Meanwhile, the kitchen kept grinding forward. More plates, more trays, more steam. Lena glanced toward the table where Ava sat. The girl had finished her sandwich and was now carefully organizing colored pencils back into a small plastic case. "You're raising her alone?" Lena asked softly. "Yeah, she seems calm. She had to learn. That sounds heavy." He looked toward his daughter for a moment, then back to the sink. Kids adapt. The answer felt incomplete. But Lena didn't push. Instead, she picked up another stack of plates to help clear the counter. For several minutes, they worked in silence. Then, a shout echoed faintly down the hallway. "Has anyone seen Noah?" The voice came from the banquet corridor upstairs. Lena glanced toward the stairwell. "Probably the Halberg kid," she said. "Rich kids wander," the dishwasher replied. Another voice called from above. He was just here. Footsteps hurried across the ceiling. The music continued. But something about the tone of those voices had changed. The excitement sounded sharper now, more urgent. Lena tilted her head. "You hear that?" "Yeah, sounds like they lost him. Kids hide." The dishwasher continued rinsing plates, but his eyes had shifted slightly toward the ceiling. Listening, upstairs a woman's voice called again. "Noah?" The name echoed faintly down the stairwell. For a moment the kitchen staff ignored it. Events upstairs always had small disturbances, drunk guests, lost phones, missing purses. But Lena noticed something else. The dishwasher had stopped moving, just for a second. Then he slid the next rack into the washer. Steam burst upward. The machine roared to life. Still, something in his posture had changed, like someone who had suddenly started paying attention to something far away. And neither of them realized yet that within minutes that small voice calling for a child would turn into full panic. And when it did, the entire ballroom upstairs would discover the quiet man washing dishes downstairs was the only person in the building who knew what to do next. The dishwasher closed the steaming machine door just as another shout echoed faintly down the stairwell. Noah. This time, the voice sounded sharper, more urgent. Lena glanced toward the hallway that led to the banquet level. "That doesn't sound like a kid hiding," she murmured. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lifted another rack of dishes and slid it under the faucet. Water crashed over stainless steel as his eyes flicked briefly toward the ceiling again. Listening. Upstairs, the music had stopped. That alone made several cooks glance up. At an event like the Halberg Gala, the music never stopped. Not unless something had gone wrong. Footsteps pounded across the floor above them. A woman's voice broke through the ceiling again. Someone call the doctor. The kitchen froze. Lena's stomach tightened. That's not good. Another voice shouted something unintelligible. Then chairs scraped loudly across the ballroom floor overhead. The dishwasher shut off the faucet. Just like that. The sudden silence in front of the sink made the moment feel heavier. He wiped his hands slowly on the towel. "You stay here," he said quietly, but Lena had already moved toward the hallway. "What if someone's hurt? There are doctors upstairs. Then why are they yelling?" He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the first aid kit hanging near the kitchen entrance. Lena noticed the movement. "You keep that memorized too?" Habit. They stepped into the service corridor together. The noise upstairs had grown louder now, running footsteps. Multiple voices overlapping. The sound of panic traveled through the marble stairwell like a warning siren. A banquet server rushed down the stairs 2 at a time. His face was pale. "What happened?" Lena asked. The Halberg kid collapsed. The words hit the hallway like a dropped plate. "Collapsed?" she repeated. "Yeah, he just dropped." The server stammered. "The doctor's trying to wake him up." The dishwasher didn't hesitate. He started up the stairs. Lena blinked. "Hey, where are you going?" But he was already climbing. Fast, not frantic, just purposeful. Each step carried the quiet urgency of someone who had heard those exact words before. Collapsed. The kind of word that meant seconds mattered. Halfway up the stairwell, the noise became clearer. People shouting, someone crying, Victor Halberg's voice booming with controlled panic. "What do you mean you can't stabilize him?" The dishwasher reached the landing and stopped. The ballroom doors stood open. Inside, chaos had swallowed the elegant event. Guests crowded in a tight circle near the center of the room. Champagne glasses sat abandoned on tables. Musicians had lowered their instruments. At the center of the circle, a small boy lay on the polished marble floor, Noah Halberg. A well-dressed doctor knelt beside him, fumbling through a medical bag. "His pulse is irregular," the doctor muttered. "Fix it." Halberg snapped. "I'm trying." The boy's face had turned pale, too pale. The dishwasher stood in the doorway, watching. Silent. Lena caught up behind him, breathing hard from the stairs. Oh my God, the room smelled like expensive perfume and panic. Dozens of wealthy guests stared helplessly. Security guards hovered uselessly nearby. The doctor pressed fingers against the child's neck again. "No response," he said, frustration creeping into his voice. "Paramedics are on the way. How long?" Halberg demanded. 10 minutes, maybe. 10 minutes. The dishwasher's eyes narrowed slightly. He stepped forward. Just one step. Then stopped. Because this was the moment he had avoided for years. The moment where stepping forward meant revealing everything he had buried. The war, the training, the nights spent trying to keep soldiers alive with almost nothing. He had promised himself that life was over, that Ava deserved a father who stayed far away from chaos. But now, a child lay on the floor fighting for breath. And the doctor's hands were shaking. Lena looked from the boy to the dishwasher. Something clicked in her mind. The tattoo, the kitchen fire, the way he moved. Her voice came out almost as a whisper. "You know what's wrong, don't you?" He didn't answer. Across the room, the doctor tried again. "No pulse rhythm, this doesn't make sense." Victor Halberg's face had turned gray with fear. "My grandson isn't breathing," the words cracked through the ballroom. And suddenly, Lena stepped forward. "He can help." Every head turned. The dishwasher froze. "What?" The doctor snapped. Lena pointed directly at him. "He's military medical." The room fell silent. The billionaire stared. Guests whispered. The doctor frowned. "He's a dishwasher." Lena's voice didn't shake. "He's more than that." For a long second, the entire ballroom waited. The dishwasher looked at the child. Then at Ava in his mind. Then back at the boy on the floor. And finally, he stepped forward into the circle of stunned guests. Because sometimes the life you tried to leave behind was the only thing standing between a child and death. The circle of guests parted slowly as the dishwasher stepped forward. No one spoke. The elegant ballroom, filled minutes ago with music and laughter, now held only tension and whispered confusion. Victor Halberg stared at him like he'd been handed the wrong solution to a problem. "You?" the billionaire said sharply. The doctor beside the child looked up with irritation. "We don't have time for this." The dishwasher crouched beside the boy anyway. He didn't rush, didn't argue, just placed 2 fingers gently against the child's neck. The room watched. Seconds passed. Then he spoke quietly. His pulse isn't gone. It's unstable. The doctor frowned. I already said that, but you're checking the wrong rhythm. The dishwasher moved his hand slightly lower along the boy's throat. There, a faint beat. Too fast, too uneven. His eyes narrowed. How long ago did he collapse? He asked. 2 minutes, maybe, someone answered from the crowd. The doctor crossed his arms. And you are? The dishwasher didn't look up. Someone who's seen this before. Victor Halberg stepped closer. Can you save him? The question hung in the air. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned closer to the boy's chest, listening. Breath shallow. Heartbeat chaotic. He looked toward the doctor's bag. May I? The doctor hesitated. This is highly irregular. He's going into cardiac instability, the dishwasher interrupted quietly. The doctor blinked. How do you? Because I've treated it before. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victor Halberg's voice cut through the noise. Give him whatever he needs. Reluctantly, the doctor slid the bag closer. The dishwasher opened it. Inside were tools he hadn't touched in years. Medical gloves. Stethoscope. Monitoring strips. His hands moved with calm precision. Muscle memory. Years of it. Lena watched from the edge of the circle, heart hammering. The quiet man from the dish station suddenly looked completely different. Not smaller, not humble. Focused, commanding. He lifted the boy's chin gently, airway clear. The doctor leaned closer. You're checking respiratory response? Yes, how did you? The dishwasher glanced up briefly. Combat medicine, that single phrase changed the room. The doctor froze. Victor Halberg looked stunned. You were a medic? He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed the stethoscope against the boy's chest. Listening. Counting. Something wasn't right. He scanned the room. Did he eat anything unusual tonight? Guests exchanged uncertain looks. One of the servers stepped forward. He had dessert, chocolate mousse. The dishwasher nodded slowly. Then his eyes landed on the child's wrist. A faint rash. There. He inhaled once. Allergic reaction. The doctor leaned closer. That's impossible. There were no. His airways swelling, the dishwasher said calmly, Look. The doctor checked again. His expression shifted. Damn. Victor Halberg stepped forward. Fix it. The dishwasher already knew the next step. Epinephrine, he said. The doctor handed him the injector. He positioned it carefully. Years of training guided the movement. One precise push. The injector clicked. The room held its breath. Seconds ticked past. The boy's chest lifted slightly. Then again. The doctor checked the pulse. Stronger. More stable. A wave of relief swept through the room like air returning after suffocation. Victor Halberg staggered back into a chair. My God. The dishwasher removed the injector and placed it carefully back into the kit. The boy's breathing steadied. The doctor looked stunned. You diagnosed that in seconds. The quiet man shrugged slightly. Training. The doctor stared at him. You're not just a medic. But before the conversation could continue, sirens wailed faintly outside the hotel. Paramedics had arrived. The ballroom doors burst open as the emergency team rushed inside with a stretcher. What do we have? The doctor gestured toward the boy. Severe allergic reaction. Epinephrine administered. The paramedics began checking the child quickly. One of them glanced at the injector. Who gave the shot? The doctor pointed. The entire room turned again. The dishwasher was already standing, stepping back, like he belonged at the edge of the crowd again. Victor Halberg stood slowly. You saved my grandson. The quiet man shook his head. He'll be okay now. The paramedics lifted the boy onto the stretcher. Victor Halberg followed them toward the door. But before leaving, he turned back toward the man everyone had overlooked all evening. Wait. The ballroom froze again. What's your name? For a moment, the dishwasher seemed reluctant to answer. Then he said quietly, "Caleb." And the entire room finally understood that the quiet worker washing plates downstairs had just done something none of their wealth, power, or private doctors could accomplish. By the way, if this moment surprised you as much as it shocked the people in that ballroom, make sure you subscribe with the bell on. Because what happens after this rescue changes Caleb's life and the hotel forever. The stretcher rolled across the polished marble floor as paramedics guided Noah Halberg toward the ballroom doors. The boy was breathing now. Not perfectly, but steadily enough that the tension in the room had begun to loosen. Victor Halberg followed close beside the stretcher, his normally commanding posture replaced with raw worry. "Is he stable?" he demanded. One of the paramedics checked the monitor. "Pulse is improving." The epinephrine helped. The billionaire exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the stretcher as they moved. Good. Behind them, the ballroom remained frozen. Guests stood in stunned silence. Moments earlier, they had been sipping champagne and discussing investments. Now every one of them was staring at the man who had been washing dishes downstairs. He stood near the edge of the circle again. Quiet, already retreating back into the background. Lena noticed first, "Hey," but he had already turned toward the hallway. The dishwasher moved calmly through the crowd, slipping between guests who barely knew what to say. The doctor who had been treating the boy stepped forward. "Wait a second." The man stopped. "You recognized the reaction immediately," the doctor said. "Most physicians would have needed lab confirmation." The dishwasher shrugged slightly. "Field medicine doesn't wait for labs." The doctor studied him carefully now. "You weren't just a medic, were you?" A pause stretched between them. The room leaned closer without meaning to. Finally, the dishwasher said quietly, "I was part of a trauma response unit." Someone in the crowd whispered. Victor Halberg returned from the doorway just as the paramedics disappeared down the hall. His grandson was safe now. For the first time since the crisis began, he really looked at the man who had stepped forward. The billionaire's voice softened slightly. "You saved him." The dishwasher shook his head again. "I stabilized him. The hospital will take it from here." Halberg crossed the floor slowly. Guests parted for him. When he stopped in front of the quiet man, the contrast between them felt enormous. Expensive suit, polished shoes, a life of boardrooms and headlines, facing a man wearing a dishwashing apron. Yet everyone in the room now understood who had held the real power minutes earlier. "What's your last name?" Halberg asked. The man hesitated, then answered, "Rourke." Victor Halberg's expression shifted slightly, like the name stirred something distant. "Where did you train, Mr. Rourke?" "Army Medical Corps." The doctor beside them let out a quiet breath. "That explains it." A guest near the back spoke up. "You mean the dishwasher was a military trauma medic?" The word dishwasher hung awkwardly in the air. Halberg glanced toward the kitchen hallway. "You work here?" "Yeah." "Why?" The question came out before Halberg could soften it. Why would someone capable of what he just witnessed be scrubbing plates? The answer came without hesitation. "I needed something quiet." The billionaire studied him more closely. The calm posture, the steady breathing, the eyes of someone who had seen far worse than a ballroom emergency. Then Halberg noticed something else. Across the room, near the service doors, a little girl was standing beside Lena, watching. Halberg pointed gently. "Your daughter?" Rourke followed his gaze. "Yeah, she was here the whole time." Most nights, the billionaire looked from the girl to the man who had just saved his grandson. A strange mixture of emotions crossed his face. Gratitude, confusion, respect. Mr. Rourke, Halberg said carefully, you just did something my entire security team and private physician couldn't. The dishwasher shifted slightly. It was just training. No, Halberg replied quietly. It was more than that. For the first time, the room noticed how many people were still watching. Dozens of guests, executives, hotel managers, every one of them witnessing the moment. Halberg straightened his jacket. I'd like to thank you properly. That's not necessary. It is to me. The dishwasher seemed uncomfortable with the attention. Your grandson will recover, he said. That's enough. Halberg shook his head slowly. You saved my family tonight. Lena stepped closer to Ava, kneeling beside the girl. You okay? She whispered. Ava nodded. That happens a lot, Lena blinked. What do you mean? My dad helps people, the girl said simply. Across the ballroom, Halberg was still watching the quiet man who had just tried to disappear again. You know, the billionaire said slowly, I've spent decades building companies, buying properties, hiring experts. He glanced around the ballroom, but tonight the most capable person in this building was the man washing dishes. The statement landed heavily in the room, because everyone there knew it was true. Rourke shifted uncomfortably. I should get back to work. Halberg raised a hand. You're not going back to the dish station tonight. The quiet man looked surprised. Why? The billionaire's voice carried calm authority now. Because tomorrow morning we're going to have a very different conversation about what someone like you should really be doing in my hotel. The words hung in the ballroom long after Victor Halberg finished speaking. For a moment, no one moved. The dishwasher, Caleb, stood there quietly, the attention of the entire room pressing against him like heat. He shook his head once. That won't be necessary. Halberg blinked. You just saved my grandson, and he's breathing. That's what matters. The billionaire stepped closer. You're walking away from this like it's nothing. It's not nothing. Caleb replied calmly. It's just finished. The answer confused several people in the room. But Lena understood something most of them didn't. He wasn't being humble. He was protecting something. Halberg studied him carefully. You really intend to go back to washing dishes after what just happened? Caleb nodded once. Yeah, why? For a moment, the quiet man didn't answer. Instead, his eyes drifted toward the small figure near the service door, Ava. She stood beside Lena, holding her backpack straps and watching the room with quiet curiosity. Caleb's expression softened slightly. That's why. Halberg followed his gaze. The little girl looked back at them calmly, not nervous, just observant. The billionaire's voice lowered. You're keeping things simple for her. Something like that. The doctor who had been assisting earlier stepped forward again. You realize the kind of experience you demonstrated tonight is rare, right? He said. Caleb gave a small shrug. War zones have a way of teaching fast. The doctor crossed his arms. Most trauma surgeons don't diagnose allergic cardiac shock in 10 seconds. That's because most surgeons have a hospital. The ballroom remained quiet. Guests who had once been laughing and celebrating now listened like students. Halberg spoke again. What happened to your military career? The question lingered. Caleb's eyes moved briefly across the ballroom windows where the dark harbor shimmered beyond the glass. Ended, he said simply. The doctor tilted his head. Injury? Something like that. Lena noticed the way his shoulders shifted, like someone stepping around a memory he didn't want to revisit. Halberg seemed to sense it too. He changed direction. Well, regardless of how it ended, it clearly didn't erase your skills. Caleb didn't respond. Instead, he stepped slightly backward, a signal he intended to leave, but the billionaire wasn't finished. Mr. Rourke. Caleb paused. I meant what I said, Halberg continued. Tomorrow we talk. That's generous, but it's not generosity, Halberg interrupted. It's logic. A few guests exchanged glances. The billionaire gestured toward the ballroom floor where the crisis had unfolded minutes earlier. A room full of powerful people stood helpless tonight. He pointed toward Caleb, and the only person who knew what to do was the man everyone ignored. No one argued, because it was true. The doctor nodded slowly. He's right. Caleb shifted again. I didn't do it for recognition. Good, Halberg said. Because recognition is the least interesting part of this. That caught the room's attention. What do you mean? Lena asked. Halberg looked around the ballroom. My hotels host thousands of guests every week. He paused. Families, executives, children. Then his eyes returned to Caleb, and tonight I realized something dangerous. What's that? The doctor asked. Halberg's voice lowered. If something like this happened again, there's no guarantee the right person would be standing nearby. The statement landed heavily, because everyone now understood the truth. Caleb had been a coincidence, a miracle disguised as a dishwasher. Halberg took another step forward. You said you wanted a quiet life. I do. I respect that. Then the billionaire smiled faintly. But I also know opportunity when I see it. Caleb sighed softly. That's usually the beginning of trouble. Several guests laughed nervously. Halberg didn't. You know what I see when I look at you, Mr. Rourke? What? Someone hiding. The words were blunt, but not cruel. Caleb's eyes hardened slightly. Or maybe someone who's finished. Halberg shook his head slowly. People who are finished don't step forward the way you did tonight. The quiet man didn't reply. Instead, he finally turned toward Ava and Lena near the service doors. I should get her home. Lena smiled softly. Long night? Yeah. He began walking toward them. But before he reached the door, Halberg spoke again. One more thing. Caleb stopped. If you hadn't been here tonight, Halberg said quietly, my grandson might not be alive. The room felt that truth deeply. Caleb nodded once. Then I'm glad I was. And with that, the quiet man who had just saved the most powerful man's family in the room walked calmly toward the service corridor, ready to disappear back into the same quiet life he had been living only an hour earlier. But Lena had the strange feeling the world upstairs wasn't going to let him disappear quite so easily anymore. The ballroom doors closed softly behind them as Caleb stepped into the quiet service corridor. The sudden silence felt strange after the tension upstairs. For a moment he just stood there, letting the noise fade. Then Ava ran toward him. Dad. He knelt automatically as she wrapped her arms around his neck. You okay? He asked gently. She nodded against his shoulder. You were helping that boy, yeah. Is he gonna be okay? He should be. Ava seemed satisfied with that answer. She stepped back, studying his face like she always did after one of those moments when something serious happened around him. You did the doctor thing again. Caleb gave a small smile. Something like that. Lena leaned against the wall nearby, still trying to process everything she had just witnessed. That was unbelievable, she said quietly. He stood up slowly. It was just an allergic reaction. Most people wouldn't recognize it that fast training. She crossed her arms. You keep saying that word like it explains everything, he shrugged. In my world it usually did. Ava tugged lightly on his sleeve. Are we going home? Soon, Lena watched the interaction again. The calm between them. The quiet normalcy that had returned only seconds after a life-or-death moment. You weren't kidding earlier, she said. What? About wanting a quiet life. Caleb picked up Ava's backpack and slung it over one shoulder. That part's real. Down the hallway, the ballroom doors opened again. Footsteps approached. Victor Halberg stepped into the corridor, adjusting his suit jacket. 2 hotel managers followed nervously behind him. The billionaire stopped a few feet away from Caleb and Ava. "Mr. Rourke," Caleb sighed softly. "Sir," Halberg crouched slightly so he was eye level with Ava. "You must be the brave girl who waded through all that chaos." Ava nodded politely. "I'm Ava," Halberg smiled. "Well, Ava, your father just saved my grandson's life." She looked up at Caleb. "I know." The billionaire chuckled quietly. "Seems like you're used to that." Ava shrugged. "He helps people." Halberg straightened and looked back at Caleb. "That's exactly what I want to talk about." Caleb shook his head. "I told you. And I told you tomorrow morning," Halberg replied calmly. "But after thinking about it for the last 10 minutes, I don't see any reason to wait." The hallway fell quiet. One of the hotel managers shifted nervously. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. "Sir, I appreciate the gratitude, but this isn't gratitude." Halberg gestured toward the ballroom behind him. "You handled a medical crisis faster than my entire security team. That situation was specific. Emergencies always are." The billionaire folded his arms. "You know what my hotels don't currently have?" Caleb looked tired already. "A dishwasher?" Halberg almost laughed. "No. A trained emergency response coordinator." The title hung in the air. Lena's eyes widened slightly. The managers exchanged surprised glances. Caleb stared at him. "You're serious?" "Completely. I'm not looking for a new career." Halberg shook his head. "I'm not offering a career change. What are you offering?" "A role." Caleb waited. "Someone who trains staff to recognize crises," Halberg explained. "Medical, environmental, safety." The billionaire's voice remained steady. "Tonight proved something important. Wealth and status don't mean much in a real emergency." Lena nodded quietly. Caleb didn't. "I left that world for a reason," he said. Halberg studied him carefully. "And I respect that." Then he gestured toward Ava. "But you also stepped forward tonight when it mattered." Caleb looked down at his daughter. She was quietly holding his hand now. Halberg continued. "You don't have to go back to war zones. That's not the same thing. I know." The billionaire's tone softened. "I'm asking you to help people stay safe." The hallway remained silent for several seconds. Finally, Caleb exhaled. "I'll think about it." Halberg nodded once. "That's all I'm asking." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. "Come to my office tomorrow at 10. Caleb took the card reluctantly. "All right." Halberg smiled faintly. "And Mr. Rourke?" "Yeah? Next time someone spills coffee on you." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Maybe take the day off afterward." For a brief moment, the tension broke. Even Lena laughed. By the way, if you're enjoying this story and want to see more incredible moments like this, make sure you subscribe with the bell on so you don't miss the next chapter. Halberg turned toward the elevators. His managers hurried after him. The corridor grew quiet again. Lena looked at Caleb. "So, emergency response coordinator." He glanced at the card in his hand. Then at Ava. Then back at the hallway leading to the dish station. "Let's just get home," he said softly. But for the first time that night, the quiet life he had built no longer felt quite as certain as it had only a few hours earlier. The elevator doors closed behind Victor Halberg, leaving the service corridor quiet again. For a long moment, Caleb simply stared at the card in his hand. Ava tugged lightly on his sleeve. "Dad?" He blinked and slipped the card into his pocket. "Yeah? Are we going home now?" "Yeah," he said gently. "Let's grab your jacket." Lena pushed away from the wall. "I'll walk you guys to the exit." They started down the corridor together, the sound of their footsteps echoing softly along the tiled floor. The hotel had begun settling after the chaos. Staff moved quickly but quietly now, clearing dishes and resetting rooms. News traveled fast in places like this. Several employees glanced curiously at Caleb as they passed. One of the cooks from earlier leaned through the kitchen door. "Hey, the kid okay?" "Yeah," Caleb replied. "He'll recover." The cook let out a breath of relief. "Good. Man, that was intense." They continued walking. Lena studied him again. "You're really just going to think about it?" "That's what I said. Most people would have said yes immediately. Most people didn't spend years trying to leave that world. They reached the lockers." Caleb grabbed Ava's small coat and helped her slip her arms into it. "You warm enough?" She nodded. Then she looked up at him curiously. "Are you going to be a doctor again?" The question made him pause. "I was never a doctor, but you helped that boy." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes helping is enough." Ava seemed satisfied with that. Lena leaned against the lockers again. "You know he's not wrong. About what? That hotel probably needs someone like you. Every hospital does too," Caleb replied. "But you're not working in a hospital," he sighed. "No, why not?" For a moment he said nothing. Then quietly, "Because hospitals remind me of the war." The word surprised her. She hadn't expected that level of honesty. "You lost people over there, it wasn't a question." Caleb nodded once. Yeah, Ava was busy zipping her backpack, unaware of the weight behind the conversation. Lena lowered her voice. "And the dish station doesn't remind you?" "No. Why?" "Because dishes break," he said simply. "People aren't supposed to." The answer sat heavily in the air. They walked toward the staff exit. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the pavement. The harbor lights shimmered across the dark water beyond the street. Lena pushed the door open. Cold air drifted inside. "You know," she said quietly, "everyone upstairs is still talking about what you did." "That'll pass." "I don't think so." He stepped outside with Ava beside him. Cars rolled slowly past the front entrance as guests continued leaving the gala. "You stepped into a room full of powerful people and took control," Lena said. "I stepped into a medical emergency. Same thing tonight." He glanced at her. "You give me too much credit." She shook her head. "No, they gave you too little." Ava squeezed his hand. "Dad, can we get pancakes tomorrow morning?" He chuckled softly. "Pancakes? Yeah." Sure, that simple conversation grounded him again. A quiet breakfast, school drop-off, another shift at the hotel, the life he had built. But the card in his pocket felt heavier with every step. They reached the edge of the parking lot. Lena stopped. "Hey," he turned. "If you do go tomorrow, let me know how it goes. You assuming I will?" She smiled. "You're the kind of person who doesn't ignore a chance to help people." He thought about that. About the ballroom. The child on the floor. The instinct that had pushed him forward before he even realized it. Maybe some parts of him hadn't changed as much as he believed. Ava tugged again. "Dad, pancakes." "Right." He smiled down at her. "Let's get you home." They walked toward his old pickup truck parked beneath a flickering streetlight. Lena watched them for a moment. The quiet man who had just saved the most powerful family in the building. The little girl who believed helping people was normal. As the truck door opened, Caleb paused briefly. His hand slipped into his jacket pocket. The business card slid between his fingers. Victor Halberg, Executive Chairman. Meeting 10 a.m. For years he had avoided doors like that. Doors that pulled him back toward the world he had escaped. But tonight had reminded him of something he hadn't expected. Some instincts never left. And sometimes the life you tried to bury quietly waited for the moment someone else needed it again. He looked up at the hotel towering above the harbor, lights still glowing, people still talking about what happened. Then he climbed into the truck beside Ava. And for the first time since leaving the army, Caleb Rourke seriously wondered if the quiet life he built might be about to change. The truck engine rumbled to life beneath the dim parking lot light. Rain tapped softly across the windshield as Caleb adjusted the rearview mirror. Ava was already half-curled against the passenger seat, hugging her backpack like a pillow. "Seatbelt," he reminded gently. She sighed but clicked it into place. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "You look different tonight." He pulled the truck slowly out of the parking lot. "How?" "Like when you watch the news and the rescue people show up." He smiled faintly. "Rescue people?" "Yeah, the ones who know what to do." He kept his eyes on the wet road. "Sometimes people just remember things they learned." "From the army?" "From a long time ago." Ava seemed satisfied with that answer and leaned her head against the window. Within minutes, her breathing slowed into sleep. The quiet filled the cab of the truck as the city lights slid past. For a few miles, Caleb said nothing, but the card in his pocket kept pressing against his chest like a reminder. Victor Halberg, meeting 10 a.m. He had spent years avoiding decisions like this, anything that pulled him back toward responsibility, pressure, or chaos. The dish station had been safe, predictable. No life or death choices, no memories waiting around the corner. But tonight had shaken something loose. He remembered the boy's pulse under his fingers, the panicked room, the instant when training took over. He hadn't hesitated, not even for a second, which meant part of him had never really left that life behind. The truck rolled quietly through the sleeping streets toward their small apartment building. By the time he parked, the rain had stopped. He carefully lifted Ava from the seat and carried her upstairs. She stirred slightly as he unlocked the door. "Pancakes tomorrow," she murmured sleepily. "Promise." He tucked her into bed, pulling the blanket up to her shoulders. For a moment he simply stood there, watching her breathe. That steady rise and fall grounded him. It was the reason he had walked away from everything. War had taken enough. He refused to let it take this too. Still, the image of the ballroom kept replaying in his mind, a child dying, a room full of wealth and authority frozen in fear. And the moment Lena had pointed at him, "He can help." Caleb walked into the small kitchen and poured a glass of water. The quiet apartment hummed with refrigerator noise and distant traffic. His hand drifted to the card again. Halberg hadn't offered money. Or fame. He had offered purpose, training people to recognize emergencies, keeping guests safe, helping people before things went wrong. It wasn't war. But it wasn't hiding either. He leaned against the counter, thinking, because deep down he knew something uncomfortable. If another crisis happened tomorrow, he wouldn't walk away. Morning arrived sooner than he expected. Sunlight crept through the blinds as Ava wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "Pancakes?" He chuckled. "Already? You promised, all right." While the batter cooked on the skillet, Ava swung her legs from the kitchen stool. "You going to work today?" He flipped a pancake. "Maybe later." "Why later?" He hesitated. "I've got a meeting first." "With who?" He placed a pancake on her plate. "The man whose grandson got sick." Ava's eyes widened. "The rich guy?" "Yeah. Are you in trouble?" He laughed softly. "No." She poured syrup carefully across the pancake. "Good." He sat across from her with his coffee. "You think I should go?" he asked. She shrugged. "Did he need help?" "Maybe. Then you should go." The answer came so easily it almost surprised him. "Why?" Ava took a bite. "Because helping people is what you do." He studied her for a moment. Sometimes children saw things adults complicated. He finished his coffee and stood. "All right." The decision settled quietly in his chest. After dropping Ava at school, Caleb parked outside the Hallberg International Hotel headquarters downtown. The building towered into the sky. Glass, steel, money. The kind of place he had spent years avoiding. He checked the time. 9:57 a.m. 3 minutes early. Caleb stepped out of the truck and looked up at the massive doors. For years he had hidden behind a sink, convincing himself the world didn't need him anymore. But today someone had opened a door he never expected. And for the first time since the war ended, he was about to walk back into a room where his skills might matter again. The glass doors of Hallberg International slid open with a soft mechanical whisper. Caleb stepped inside. The lobby felt nothing like the dish station he had left the night before. Everything gleamed: polished stone floors, towering columns, quiet fountains, and executives moving briskly through the morning rush. For a second he felt out of place. Boots slightly worn. Plain jacket. Hands that had spent the last year in soap and steel sinks. But he didn't stop walking. A receptionist looked up from the marble desk. "Good morning. Can I help you? I have a meeting with Victor Hallberg." Her fingers paused above the keyboard. Name? Caleb Rourke. The recognition was immediate. Oh, her posture shifted slightly. "Yes, Mr. Rourke. Mr. Hallberg is expecting you." She gestured toward a private elevator behind the desk. Top floor. Caleb nodded and walked toward it. The elevator ride was quiet. 30 floors climbed in seconds. When the doors opened, a single hallway stretched toward a large office lined with windows overlooking the harbor. Victor Hallberg stood near the glass wall, reading something on a tablet. He looked up when Caleb entered, right on time. Caleb stepped inside. "You said 10. Hallberg smiled faintly. "I appreciate punctual people. The office was enormous but simple. No clutter, just clean lines and quiet authority." Hallberg set the tablet down. "I heard Noah is doing well this morning. Good. Doctors confirmed your diagnosis." Caleb shrugged slightly. "Glad he's all right." Hallberg studied him for a moment. "You still look uncomfortable being here. Boardrooms were never my favorite environment." "I suspected that." The billionaire motioned toward a chair. "Sit." Caleb sat. Hallberg remained standing, pacing slowly toward the window. "You know," he began, "when someone builds companies long enough, they develop a particular instinct." "For what?" "For recognizing value most people overlook." Caleb didn't respond. Hallberg turned back toward him. "Last night I watched a room full of successful people panic." He paused. "And then I watched a dishwasher calmly save my grandson's life. It wasn't that dramatic." Hallberg raised an eyebrow. "You stopped a medical crisis in front of 200 witnesses. Anyone trained could have done it. That's the problem." Hallberg leaned forward slightly. "They weren't trained." Silence filled the office. Finally, Caleb said, "You mentioned a role, yes." Hallberg walked to his desk and opened a folder. Inside were documents, diagrams, and training outlines. "I stayed up half the night sketching this." He slid the folder across the desk. Caleb opened it. Emergency response protocols. Staff training systems. Medical awareness programs. Every page carried the same title at the top: Hallberg Safety Initiative. Caleb looked up. "You're serious." "Very." Hallberg sat across from him now. "Every hotel in my company will eventually adopt this program, and you want me to run it?" "Yes." Caleb exhaled slowly. "That's a big job it is. I've been washing dishes for a year, and before that?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said quietly, "Before that I ran trauma response units in places most people don't want to imagine." Hallberg nodded. "Exactly." The billionaire folded his hands on the desk. "You spent years learning how to keep people alive in the worst environments on Earth." He gestured toward the city beyond the window. Now I want you to use those skills to make sure my hotels are the safest places families can stay. Caleb studied the folder again. Training schedules, emergency simulations, medical response teams. The work felt familiar, structured, purposeful. But it also meant stepping out of the quiet life he had built. "What about Ava?" he asked. Halberg smiled slightly. "I checked with the hotel manager this morning." Caleb looked up sharply. "You did what?" "I confirmed you've been one of their most reliable employees." The billionaire leaned back. "And I also learned you never missed a shift unless your daughter was sick." Caleb didn't know how to respond to that. Halberg continued. "The position includes normal hours. Normal? No night shifts." Caleb blinked. "And your daughter's welcome at the training offices after school if needed." That caught him off guard. Halberg noticed. "Mr. Rourke, I'm not trying to change who you are, then what are you doing? I'm giving the right man the right job." The room grew quiet again. Caleb looked down at the folder one more time, then he closed it slowly. "I have one condition." Halberg leaned forward. "Name it. I'm not a corporate executive, I know. I train people." "That's it," Halberg smiled. "Perfect." Caleb stood. The decision settled firmly now. "All right." Halberg stood too. "Welcome aboard." They shook hands. And for the first time in years, Caleb Rourke stepped into a future where the skills he once tried to bury would finally be used to protect lives again, without leaving his daughter behind. The handshake ended quietly. No applause. No dramatic moment. Just two men standing in a quiet office overlooking the harbor, while a decision reshaped the future of a life that had been hiding behind a sink only 12 hours earlier. Victor Halberg released Caleb's hand and nodded once. "We'll start small," he said. "One hotel. One training program." Caleb slipped the folder under his arm. "That's all it needs to be." Halberg walked him to the door. "You know," the billionaire added, "most people spend their lives trying to be important." Caleb paused. "I spent years trying not to be." Halberg smiled slightly. "Funny thing about purpose, it usually finds people who aren't looking for it." The elevator ride down felt different than the ride up. Not heavier. Clearer. When the doors opened into the busy lobby, people were already moving through the morning rush again. Business calls. Meetings. Suitcases rolling across polished floors. But this time, Caleb wasn't walking through the building as the invisible man from the dish station. He was walking through it as someone who had just been trusted with protecting thousands of people. He stepped outside into the bright morning air. The harbor wind carried the smell of salt water across the street. For a moment he simply stood there, breathing. Then he pulled out his phone. The school bell would have rung by now. Ava would be finishing her morning class. He dialed the front office. "Hi," he said when the receptionist answered. "Could you let Ava Rourke know her dad will pick her up early today?" A pause. "Of course, Mr. Rourke." 20 minutes later he stood outside the school gate. Children poured into the courtyard as classes switched. Ava spotted him immediately. "Dad," she ran across the pavement and wrapped her arms around him. "You're early, I know." She leaned back, studying his face. "How'd the meeting go?" Caleb crouched slightly so they were eye level. "Well, looks like we're both starting something new." Her eyes widened. "Like what?" "Remember how you said helping people is what I do?" She nodded. "Yeah. Looks like I'm going to keep doing that." Ava grinned. "Cool." He laughed softly. "Yeah. Cool." They walked toward the truck together, her small hand tucked into his. As the engine started and the city passed by outside the window, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt since before the war ended. Not pressure. Not fear. Purpose. Not the battlefield kind that came with chaos and loss. but the quieter kind. The kind that came with protecting people before disaster ever reached them. Back at the hotel later that week, the dish station had a new worker. The kitchen buzzed with the same noise as always. Plates clattered. Steam rose from machines. But one thing had changed. Every employee in the building now knew the story. The quiet dishwasher who had saved a child's life, and the new safety director who walked the hall's training staff to recognize danger before it struck. Sometimes Lena would still see him in the hallway, clipboard in hand, teaching a group of employees how to spot medical emergencies. And sometimes Ava sat in the office nearby doing homework while her father worked. The life Caleb tried to hide from hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed shape. Because sometimes the moment people overlook you is the moment that reveals exactly who you were meant to be all along. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Ask me for the next story title, and we'll build another powerful story together. Subscribe. And don't miss our next story. The janitor they ignored shut down the entire hospital, then the CEO discovered his military past. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?